Well, hello everyone and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. Before we get started with this video, I want to do a little housekeeping. I wanted to let all my viewers know that I'm going to be at VCF East in New Jersey this coming April on the 14th, 15th, and 16th. I'll be there all 3 days. So if you were thinking of going to VCF East, this might be the little nudge that gets you going if you want to at least come and talk to me. There'll be a bunch of other YouTubers there as well, plus I'll be doing a panel discussion with Bill Hurd and some other YouTubers at the event. Also, just like last year, I'm going to be at VCF Midwest in Chicago, but that happens later in the year. I think it's September. I don't remember the exact days. So if you're around that area and you're planning on going to that event, I will be there as well. There have been some questions about the VCF that is coming up in Dallas, this newly announced VCF. I will not be attending that event, at least not this year. So that's going to be it for the housekeeping, and let's get to the regularly scheduled program. And by the way, I have a cold, which is why my voice sounds like this. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we're going to be looking at this. It's an MSX. It's the first time I've ever actually touched one of these in person, let alone opened one up and played around with it. So without further ado, let's get right to it. So this MSX machine, it's an AX-230, 64 kilobytes of RAM. You may be noticing, and if I zoom up here on the keyboard, this has got Arabic writing on it. This machine was sent in by Stuart on a mail call episode quite a long time ago. I decided to finally get this thing out and take a look at it. There's an MSX logo right there, normal arrow keys, all the standard MSX keys. If you're familiar with the MSX, which I am not, but I know that this is pretty standard stuff for an MSX. It's just kind of interesting how it's all in Arabic. Now I don't have the top cover already removed, which is why it's not totally together. The machine is actually quite sturdily built, but I have opened it up, take a look inside already, and I'll talk about that in a second. Now you may be noticing that there isn't an obvious brand name on this, and I did some searching online, and this machine was targeted for the Middle East, but it was made by Sanyo in Japan. And there's a Sanyo machine, which we'll take a look online in just a second. It looks basically identical to this, except it has 2 cartridge slots, and this only has 1. And then, of course, it has all the localization of the Arabic writing on all the keys. Now, I think right here is actually the logo of the company that makes this, along with a mini version of the logo here, but it's written in Arabic, which I cannot read. Before I delve further into this machine, let's take a look at what the MSX standard is all about. So Wikipedia has a pretty good article here, and this machine is an MSX1, by the way. There were 2 and I think maybe a 3 machine. The MSX1 standard was developed originally by Microsoft and ASCII Corporation. Who is this ASCII Corporation? Yes, okay, it's a Japanese company, and the standard was developed in 1983. From a standard perspective, it was designed to be something like VHS was to videotapes, where multiple manufacturers could make machines of that standard, so you weren't just stuck with one-off machines, kind of like the Commodore was, 64 that is, or the Atari 800s, or the Apple II for that matter. These were all lines of computers that were only made by that one company, and they had the idea of making a standard that could be made by anyone to hopefully bring prices down and bring some variation to the market with machines having different features and stuff like that, but generally all being software compatible with each other. Now the article says here that 9 million MSX1, I take it, machines were sold worldwide, but 7 million of those were in Japan. And I think the rest were generally in overseas markets, and I am not sure if any MSX machines were ever sold in the US, although I probably am mistaken and maybe there were some, but they were very, very uncommon compared to, say, in Japan or the rest of the world for that matter. The MSX standard included MSX Basic, which is this section right here is talking about it. And if we look over here, you can see that there were several manufacturers, I mean more than several. There were a whole lot of manufacturers. Primarily, they were Japanese companies, but I think you had some others as well making these systems. Take a look at this section right here at the specifications for the MSX standard. It runs a Z80 processor, up to 64K of RAM, and it has a TMS 9918 video chip. That is the video chip from the TI-99, the ColecoVision, also the Sega SG-1, I think it's called, whatever, the early 8-bit Sega game console before the Master System. And incidentally, all those things are also inside the Nabu PC, which I recently featured on my channel, and there's a whole lot of activity going on around that machine. Yes, the Sanyo MPC is very similar to the MSX standard, although it isn't an MSX machine. It is slightly different in the way it works, although I know there is work to port MSX software over to the Sanyo, because of course, having sold so many of these MSX machines over the years, especially in Japan, there are a lot of games and other pieces of software for it that are pretty cool and would be neat to run on the Sanyo. Anyhow, I digress. Back to this machine. If we switch tabs here, this is the webpage on msx.org, a very good resource for MSX machines about this particular computer. It's the Sakhr AX-230. And the description reads, Sakhr Computers was a Kuwaiti company that was selling MSX computers imported from Japan all over the Arab world. The Sakhr AX-230 is a Sanyo MPC-2. I'll just bring up another tab for that. Localized for Arabic countries, but the PCB components are not the same. An RGB output was added, and a cartridge slot was removed. Well, we noticed that by looking at the top of this thing. And it mentions if you boot the computer without holding the control key, it boots into an Arabic mode. And I did test this machine already, it does work, so we're not gonna do any repairing in this video. But if you do hold down the control key, it boots into an international mode, which basically just goes to the normal MSX ROM and doesn't actually load any of the Arabic extensions that this machine has on it. Now, it looks like this machine came out in 1986, and what's interesting about it is it has 64K of RAM. It says it has 16K of VRAM, which I don't think is exactly correct. But the interesting thing about this machine, if we bring up this picture here, is that this machine has a single chip made by Toshiba, the T7937A, that encompasses the video chip, the CPU, and the sound chip all into one thing. In fact, I think there's a bunch of other logic in there as well, but it looks like you can have up to 16 different banks of 64K of memory. And it seems like in this machine, all that logic that does that selecting is also inside this chip. So because of that, when you look at the motherboard, there is not a lot going on. Now, this particular computer I have on the bench looks exactly like this on the inside. Right there is that system on a chip. That is the keyboard connection. That is the one cartridge slot connection. Then you have 64K of DRAM right here, and it's the same type of DRAM as on the shortboard Commodore 64s. This right here is apparently 32K of SRAM, so that's where it says that it's only 16K of VRAM. I think it's actually 32K. Maybe half of it's not used or half of it's used for something else. And then these three chips are all ROM chips. Those ROMs have the Arabic extensions that are available on this machine, and there's some pictures of it here. We'll take a look at that in a second when I turn it on. But there's a whole bunch of built-in games and software on this computer, which I'm hoping I can do some modifications to and maybe run some other stuff on this. Now, from my understanding, most MSX1 software came on either cartridges or on cassettes, and this machine has a cassette port on the back and obviously this one cartridge slot. I actually have one cartridge for this machine. It's this software here called Faces. And we'll take a look at that in a second and get this in the camera view. There it is. It's Arabic writing there, and there's that same logo of the company that imported or localized this MSX computer. So maybe they were the purveyor of all the different Arabic MSX software. If you happen to know how popular these types of machines were in the Arabic countries, I'd love to hear more about it, because while there's some information about this machine, there's not a whole ton about how many were sold. I know there were a few different machines that were brought in and localized for the Arabic regions, but yeah, this is going to be one of them. Now, further down on the msx.org article, we can see the memory layout for this machine. So we have 64K of memory broken up into 4 pages. And then, like I said, we have the 4 slots, 0 through 3. And then on this machine, at least, slot 3 actually has 4 pages. I don't know what you want to call these. They're not pages, they're just sub-slots, I suppose. But I think from my understanding, each one of these slots could have up to 4 slots. You can, like I said, you can have up to 16 slots. When I did some reading on the architecture of MSX machines, it seems like the main ROM usually sits always here at slot 0 at the beginning. And a Z80 processor, once you start initializing, you first turn the chip on, it starts to execute ROM right from the bottom of address space, address 0000. So the ROM sort of has to be there, at least at boot. And what I don't fully understand is, like, while the ROM is mapped in here, does that mean these upper 2 pages have, say, the RAM mapped into them? So you have 32K of ROM, 32K of RAM. That might actually be the case, but I haven't quite figured that out. Either way, in slot 1, right in the middle here, you have what is labeled the Arabic ROM. Then you have the entire 64K assigned to the cartridge slot over in slot 2. And then you also have 64K of RAM sitting up here in slot 3. And then there's this games ROM here, which I think is this extra ROM chip, which I happen to have out of the machine right now, that has all the extra games on this machine. Now, with this out of there, the computer still works. I think it just doesn't see this extra software that sits up here in slot 3.3. And I have a feeling this Arabic ROM here sitting in slot 1 actually looks for this ROM chip and then allows access to this extra software. Now let's look at the tab for the Sanyo MPC-2. That's the machine that was the basis for this one. And if we look down here, it basically looks pretty much identical. Obviously, we don't have any localization for Arabic, and instead we have Japanese localization, so there's some kanji writing and stuff on here. But it's basically identical, except it's got 2 cartridge slots. The layout of the Japanese model is quite different though, and I think that's because it doesn't use that same Toshiba chip that integrates everything into one. It still uses one. Here it is. It's called the MSX engine, the T7775. The difference with this chip and the one that's in this machine is that this chip on the Sanyo doesn't integrate the video controller into the chip. And the thing about this particular computer is it outputs PAL. The Toshiba chip that's in this particular computer, when I cross-reference all the machines that use it, they are all PAL region computers. I have a feeling that this chip only works with PAL output, which Japan is NTSC. Now what's interesting, if we look down here at the slot map for the standard version, there are 2 versions of this Sanyo version of the computer, and one actually has 3 cartridge slots, but this one here, the standard version, only has 2. And notice the RAM is in the same spot in slot 3, and the main ROM is obviously in the same spot, but slot 1 and slot 2 are for the cartridges. And if we go back here, notice that the cartridge slot sits in slot 2, but slot 1 is where that Arabic ROM is. So I have an idea of maybe a way to run some software on this, because I obviously don't have any other cartridges besides this one. I'm gonna try to replace the Arabic ROM that sits in slot 1 on here and see if I can put a game in that slot and have it work. I was doing some research last night on cartridges used on MSX1 machines. And much like on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, there are mapper chips that are used inside of these to allow bank switching within the cartridge. So you have some games that are like 256K, 512K in one of these cartridges, and it does that by bank switching inside of here. In my investigation though, there were a number of 32K ROM cartridges, and it seems that everyone says that that is the simplest design for a cartridge. If you don't have a mapper chip, if you're gonna try to use all 64K, it's kind of non-standard, but if all you're gonna put in the cartridge is 32K, which I think was kind of the idea at the very beginning when the MSX standard came out, that is the simplest thing you can do. And everything I read says when you have a 32K ROM in one of these cartridges, it always sits between 4000 and BFFF, right in the middle 2 pages of slot 1, which is exactly where the Arabic ROM is on this motherboard. Alrighty, so let's take a look at this thing operating just to see how it looks out of the box. Incidentally, by the way, the Middle East uses 230 volts, and I'm just plugging this straight into the wall with 120 volts, and it's working. And that's because this machine actually has a voltage selector right here, and there's a built-in transformer inside, and that allowed me to switch it right to 120 volts. So this thing just worked, and the funny thing is the power cord just has a standard US plug on it. So I assume that in Kuwait or wherever this thing was originally sold, they just use a normal US plug even though they're running at 230 volts. This is the RGB output connector, but I actually don't know the pin out of that, and I couldn't find anything online, so we're just gonna use the composite video right here. And keep in mind, it is PAL, so you need something that can display PAL. And luckily I have that because I have the retro tank here, and there it is, it's booting up right now. And there it is. So this is the menu. This is in Arabic, obviously. Each of the menu items here are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And I know that 5 here is the basic extension here, but this has the Arabic extensions to it. So, I mean, you can type, it's typing in regular Roman characters. I think if I push this code key and then I type, you get Arabic writing as well. Rebooting the system here, there's a reset button on the top. Here it is, it's booting up. So this is the localization that happened. Looks like it happened in 1986. There is some built-in software. Now this is the Arabic ROM, remember, because I took this game ROM out of the machine. So if we like run 1 here, don't know what this program is, but there were screenshots of it on the webpage for msx.org. And we got 2 here, which I think is like a paint program, or no, what does this do? Oh yeah, it's a paint program or something. Notice the colors are very much the TMS 9918 colors that you get, although I think the Toshiba chip that's in this thing gives a little bit of a different color palette than you would normally get on a true TI chip. What I'm not totally sure about is the graphics processor in this thing, which is emulating that TI chip. Is it a licensed clone or is it just like an unlicensed one? Also, the Z80 processor that's in this thing, I know that's a clone as well, and it's referenced as a clone on the webpage. Is that licensed? Option number 3 here from the main menu, it looks like it's a word processor, and this one is completely in Arabic. And I think option 4 is another word processor, but yes, it's for regular English typing. And notice on the bottom, even the F key legends there are in English. Now, I'm not going to show it, but when this ROM chip is in the machine, it just has extra menu items and has a bunch of games and stuff built in. That stuff is all outlined on that webpage. So if you want to check it out, you can see it there. And just know that these ROMs have been dumped out of this machine, so all of it can be emulated. I think Open MSX is an emulator that can fully emulate this machine. So if you're curious about it, it is all there. What I'm not sure that is dumped is this cartridge. So I'm going to turn the machine off. Let's pop this into the machine here, and we'll give this a try. So this is it. This is the Faces app. I played around with it last night. It's basically a kid's program that just allows you to like swap parts out on a face. And then there are some like mini games and stuff that I don't fully understand how to use. It does support English and Arabic, so we'll start in English. So we have generate, motion, and game. So we'll do generate, I guess. So this is what I was talking about. It's kind of like Mr. Potato Head a little bit. Like you could pick the glasses. I don't know, we can change the head shape, I suppose. And then I think if I use the left and right arrows, it changes the colors. So we can add a beard, we can change the beard color, we can make it green. I mean, it's pretty silly. I think this might be exit. Oh no, hello. I guess we could name it there. Okay, I don't know, that rebooted. That rebooted it. I don't quite know if that's working correctly. Now, incidentally, you saw the date on there was 1987. I think this machine, this particular one was actually made in 1992 based on the date codes inside, but I think this thing was localized in 1986. So it was on the market for a good number of years. And I have to imagine like near the end of its life in 1992, this thing was pretty inexpensive because of course, people had PCs and Amigas and access to other stuff that far surpassed the capabilities of the 1983 MSX. Let's try out the game here. So 1 player, 2 player, we'll do 1 player, unlimited time, and we'll do varied, I suppose. Okay, so ready, press spacebar. So I hit spacebar and it cried. So I think you're supposed to pick what it did, or I'm not quite sure. It seems like there's a letter in purple, like tongue has T and whistle has a H. Is like a keyboard that, okay, what if we hit return? Ready, spacebar. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this is supposed to work, but I suppose the manual probably explained it and we don't have the manual. Anyhow, that is the Faces game, and that is this Sakhr AX-230 Arabic localized MSX machine. So let's pop the top off and take a look on the inside of this machine. And this is where I think I'm gonna try to do some ROM hacking of sorts. You know, now that I think about it, I can't read Arabic, so the fact that this thing boots up into Arabic is not really helpful. It would be probably good if it just booted up straight into MSX Basic all the time. Now I can't find any kind of schematics for this machine, but what we do have are these ROM sockets here. So this was the that was the game ROM that I took out, so that kind of disabled that extra features. But one of these 2 chips is the Arabic ROM, and one of them is the boot ROM for this machine, the main ROM. I have a feeling that this one over here, which has some Japanese writing on it, is the main ROM, and that the Arabic ROM is probably that one. Now I've identified that that's the SRAM chip, 32K. I looked up the part number incidentally, and that is the DRAM. And that's just some logic, and there's some logic. I mean, there's really hardly anything on this thing. I think the Japanese manufacturers had really figured out how to cost reduce these machines, hence the one-sided PCB here and the very simple construction. The keyboard, which has these membranes here, it has a metal backing plate, so it's not total trash, but it feels really, really bad. Now the machine's quite dusty on the inside, so probably has a lot of dust inside the keyboard, which doesn't help its case, but it's a mushy keyboard that never really felt very good anyways. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's not good either. And the fact that it's dirty means it binds up and doesn't feel that good. I'm afraid of disconnecting these ribbon cables here because if I do it and it breaks it, because this thing is fully working right now, all the keys seem to work. So I'm not gonna do that. Well, maybe I need to. What I wanna do is figure out if I disable the Arabic ROM, which I think is this one right here, will the machine just boot up into the normal basic, like the international mode? And then maybe what I can do is we can put a socket in this spot right here, and then I can swap out the ROM with like a game ROM or something like that. Okay, so now that I thought about that a little bit, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna socket both of these ROM chips, and then we can do some ROM swapping and see how that goes. Alrighty, just like that, there are sockets installed now. Now funny, I didn't have any 32-pin sockets, so I had to use the pin strips, but whatever, it works. The chips are back in. I just want to make sure that this thing is working right now after I did my desoldering. One thing I got to say about these single-sided boards, they're very easy to desolder components from. I've noticed that when I'm working on CRTs, which of course always seem to use these types of boards, getting the chips out are so easy. And I used my desoldering iron, then the chip just fell out of the board like that easily. All right, so transformer is all connected. I'm just going to turn this power switch on. I have to be careful. It is obviously switching mains current there. Do we have a working machine still? Oh yes, there we go. Okay, cool. So now we can try to figure out which of these ROM chips is actually, oh yeah, I have the extra ROM chip in there. I have all three. So notice there are more menu items now because the extra games are available in here. Okay, so if I turn this off and I remove this chip here, this is the one with the extra game ROMs on it. You'll notice when I turn it back on, the menu is going to change and we won't have those extra items there. So let's see what happens. I mean, I know this is the case because this is how it was working before. Okay, there we go. Yep, extra menu without those extra items. Now, when we look at the two ROM chips that are left in the board, this one over here is only 28 pin and it has extra pins here. And I installed a socket that could accept the full-size chip, but it is only 28 and this one is 32. When we looked at the memory map for this machine though, both of these ROMs, the Arabic ROM and the main system ROM, are both 32K. So I don't really understand why one of these is a 64K ROM like this one. This is 64K here, which is why it has extra pins. What's the deal with that? I'm just going to take one of these out here and then I guess let's just see what happens. See if the system doesn't work or works. And it's a little harder to take out because I don't have a normal socket in there. There you go. You can see I have those pin headers in there. They're all the round hole type, but they're still pin headers. Are we going to have a system that works? No, black screen. Okay, so maybe this one is the system ROM, which makes sense because it is 32K. So we'll just put this one back in the board and let's make sure the system works again. Make sure I didn't bend a pin or something like that. Okay, there we go. Oops, I have it in the wrong mode. There we go. Okay, turn that off. This one, which I assume is the Arabic ROM with the localization on it. And let's see what it does now, if anything at all. Might just give us a black screen again. Oh. Oh. Interesting. Wait, that is really confusing. How could it be working with these two ROMs disabled or removed? What are we getting here? What I should probably do is plug the keyboard back in so we can take a look at these options and see if any of them even work anymore. Okay, so we know this one is 3-3, and we know that this one is almost certainly slot 1. And then this one here is going to be slot 0, so I'll put a 0 there. So let's plug this keyboard back in so we can see if those menu items are broken now, because the extra ROM has been removed. Okay, keyboard's back in. I just hate unplugging those ribbon cables. They're so fiddly and it's like ready to break. So yeah, I might not unplug that anymore. Let's hope all the keys work on this thing. Alrighty, here we go. Power this up. What's gonna happen? Obviously, we're gonna get, you know, a pseudo working system. My assumption will be that those menu items are gonna be broken. So we hit 1. No, this is actually working. I'm confused. Let's hit the reset button on here. There it is. Okay, let's hit 5 for basic. I mean, this thing is completely working. Oh wait, you know, I just had a thought. What if it's running entirely off the Arabic ROM, and if I hold down Control when we power this on, I have to do this with 2 hands here, there we go. What if the system is not gonna work now because the normal MSX ROM is gone? No, it's still working. I didn't show this, but this is what it looks like when you boot into the, you know, international mode, which is the version of BASIC that's not localized. And I guess this thing is just working like a normal MSX. I don't understand. What does that ROM do I removed, if nothing? Let me just quickly try the other items and I will report back. Alrighty, I've just tried all the options. Everything is working. So my assumption is that both of these ROM chips here are part of the extra software, and the main 32K ROM somehow has this software added into it. You know what, I'm still confused. I'm still quite confused. And this ROM chip here is only 28 pins. the one that's left in the board, and it seems to honestly be doing all the functionality whether this chip is in the board or not. What does that possibly mean? I don't actually understand how that could possibly be the case. Now, I just had a thought. Since I don't have schematics for this board, what if this is not a ROM chip that was in there? Let's take a look at what that is. There it is. It's got Japanese writing on it. Could this possibly be like a sound chip or some other functionality? I don't have the sound hooked up, so maybe that's broken. Let's just see if we have continuity between these pins on here. Yeah, so these sockets here don't appear to have continuity. There's a few pins that do, probably like ground and 5 volts and stuff like that, but most of the other pins are not connected together. Now these pins are, these two sockets though, on the other hand, they are all parallel, except for the chip select lines, but these are definitely both ROM chips here. Okay, so what is this chip that I took out? Let's look this up. And as is usual, I'm not finding anything for this part here. I'm just finding people selling it, like LZ93A13, but there's no actual data sheet on any of these. This is just people, well, I guess they have a version of this. I mean, you click on this, look, it's gonna take us to a website. I'm sure that is not a valid data sheet link. I've tried a few of these. Let's do that. I'll try and open another tab. Look, aborted, that didn't even work. All right, so clearly this chip, not a ROM chip, doesn't seem to break the computer to remove it, but I assume maybe the sound's not working, or maybe the parallel port or some other function of this machine doesn't work without this installed. So that makes me think that this one, which is the main ROM, is actually a 27C512 pinout, which means it's actually 64K, and it must have both the main ROM in it and also has that extra Arabic ROM in this chip. So I have a copy of the ROM from the original Sanyo machine, the 32K ROM. So I think I'm just gonna stick that into an EPROM, probably 2 copies of it, and stick that onto a 27C512. Let's see what happens. Okay, there we go. It's a 27C512, same 28 pins as the original one. I put a copy of the Sanyo ROM in there twice. So I just loaded it at 0000 and also at 8000 hex. So that should mean we have 2 copies of the main ROM. So wherever the main ROM is in the memory map, however it's accessing this chip, hopefully we have a good copy of it, at least in one of the 2 spots. Alrighty, there it is. The chip is in the machine. Let's switch inputs. Okay, here we go. Are we gonna get, oh, hey, look. Oh, it freaking worked. It freaking worked. So we now have, which I left the keyboard connected as you can see here, we now have a working system that is just running stock MSX hardware. So what I'm curious about is if we take this ROM cartridge now, the Faces one, let's plug this in. Hey, it's loaded, but the Arabic characters are missing. So yes, it works. That means you could run this on your regular MSX, but look how all the text is missing. Oh, I think it crashed. Oh, no, it worked. Oh, you know what? Maybe I'm pushing a key. No, I'm not. It just doesn't have the Arabic at all because those parts of the ROM are missing. Alrighty, so that's cool. Okay, this means that this machine is now, let me turn it back on without the cartridge. This machine is now like a Sanyo, whatever that machine is from Japan, except for the fact that it is running in PAL, and obviously the Japanese machine would be NTSC. So now the question is, make sure I turn this off before I take a chip out of here. The question is the main ROM in the first half or the second half of this chip? I'm gonna assume that it's in the first half. That kind of makes the most sense logically. So I think what I'm gonna do is hopefully I have another one of these handy, otherwise I'm gonna have to erase that. I'm going to load the main ROM into the first half, and then I'm gonna load a game ROM into the second half. Because remember that the Sanyo machine has 2 cartridge slots, which I'm assuming either can boot a game. And what it probably does is it looks for a signature in that space when it powers on the machine, and if it finds it, it executes that code. So when we put this Faces cartridge in here, this on the memory map is cartridge slot 2 on the Japanese machine. So I'm thinking cartridge slot 1, the 32K at least, is actually inside of this chip, which means we might be able to get a game on here, although it'll run every time. So anyways, okay, I'll explain it if it works, and if it doesn't, then, well, it's a failed experiment. Alrighty, here we go. That is in. Now I'm not gonna say which ROM, which game ROM I loaded into that upper half, but it's a 32K ROM, and I have the main system ROM at the first half of this, so it starts at all zeros. Let's see what happens. If this thing doesn't work at all, if we don't get the BIOS splash screen, that means the main ROM, okay, there it is. Oh, syntax error. Weird, 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 weird. So maybe sticking a ROM, I hit the reset button, by the way. Maybe sticking a ROM into the top half is not something you can actually do. Now what I can do is if I move these pieces around here, I can type list. Okay, well that wasn't happy, now was it? Interesting. Well, what I have confirmed is that the main system ROM sits at the bottom of that chip, so I'm gonna try to load a different game, because maybe the game I loaded on there doesn't work or is incompatible. Now I'm programming one of these chips right now, I'm just thinking about this. The fact that it actually tries to, well, seems to try to execute the ROM implies that this might actually work, maybe. I think it's pretty normal with an MSX machine that it will show you that splash screen when you first power it up, and then it actually executes whatever's in the cartridge slot. So I have another chip here, and I've loaded another game, a different game ROM into it. Wow, that went in really easily. And let's see what happens here. And it does that, which is not working. All right. Now the funny thing is doing that right away, and I'm wondering if that's because this particular ROM chip is too slow. This is like a 250 nanosecond ROM. The TI one that I tried the first time that actually worked, went to basic, those were 150 nanoseconds. Maybe this is just too slow because I think this machine runs at like almost 4 megahertz. Maybe 250 nanoseconds is just too slow for a cartridge or whatever's going on here. So before I give up, I'm gonna erase those TI ROMs and let's try again. Okay, I've tried 3 different games and none of them seem to work. In fact, in the ROM right now is Load Runner. That's in the top 32K, and you can see it's just booted into basic here. I had tried Choplifter and Galaga, and those caused those weird reboots. And that weird static we were seeing on that one basic screen was the EPROM. I tried a different chip here, even though it looks the same, it's like the same type of chip. Obviously we have no static and the machine is working fine. If we reboot the machine with the Faces cartridge in, there is sound. I did hook up some speakers. Basically there is music as well. Let's turn the speaker up here. So we have a working sound on this machine as well, which is cool. I hadn't verified that. Again, I don't know if it's this chip right here. You know what? Why don't I take that chip out and let's see if that changes the sound. I don't know what else this chip could possibly do if it's not the sound. Maybe it's bank switching, maybe it has to do with joysticks, although it's weird that it's on like the complete opposite side of the board, so that doesn't really make sense if it's joysticks. Let's see what happens. No, we still have sound. So what exactly does this chip do? If anyone can take a look at that part number there, look it up and figure out what this does, I'd love to know. I'm gonna leave it in this machine because it doesn't seem to have an effect either way. But it does seem kind of odd that there's a whole chip in this computer that I can't figure out what it does. Okay, the machine is back together. I just want to like poke around in that new basic a little bit, new as in the original Sanyo basic. I'm curious if there's any Japanese localization on this basic. Now there's a code key here. Yes, okay, there is some kanji. Interesting is when you type, there's a click that comes out of the speakers. But when you reset the machine, it doesn't start clicking until this boots up. So that must be a key click sound. There's like a gear key here. What does this do? Is this like a shift key? Nope, that's just an extra key that just types some extra letters. Now I know very little about this particular basic. Now it's Microsoft Basic, so I think it's pretty much the same as, well, any Microsoft Basic, which to be honest is most of them. So what if we type, whoops, I'm still in kanji there. Home, syntax error, CLS. Oh, okay, that clears it. So it's much more like basic on the PC, the GW basic. So you can type color probably to change colors. Oh, okay, that works as expected. There's a graph key here, which seems to allow for some extra characters, although some of them are just kanji as well, like that one. I don't know how standardized these extra characters are. Like, is that a localized thing? I'm sure some of these, like the lines and stuff, are probably there on all the different versions. What I'm noticing, which is funny, is that Shift 2 is the quotation mark, like it is on a Commodore. But on this keyboard, the quotation mark is over here. When I push that key, you get the colon, and that's a semicolon, and that's plus. Okay, so the character map is a little unusual. So to be honest, this might not be the best ROM because like some of the keys are in weird spots. What is that? Bracket, bracket. Okay, at symbol is there instead of on Shift 2. Okay, well that gives me some pause that maybe I need to switch back to the other ROM. I'm just typing up a little program here to fool around with some colors, and it is definitely not easy to use the keyboard with the mapping being so strange. Well, that doesn't really do anything interesting. How do you stop this? Stop? No. Control stop? Oh, control stop, okay. Okay, now this should, oh, that's not doing anything either. Control stop? Oh, I see what's happening. I thought you could change the color of like one character, but that seems to not be the case. Okay, so the reality here is if I just change 20, we're gonna get rid of 20, and we're gonna change 30, color, I, comma, I, plus, oh, I don't know where the plus key is. Let's find it here. Nope, nope, nope. Oh dear, so this is the problem right here. There it is, it's the colon key. That's a bit weird. So now we hit run. It doesn't seem to, it just changes the color once and doesn't do anything else. Oh, I see the problem. Everyone was screaming at their screen there. And whoops, go to 10 and let's just remove that extra line. Let's get rid of 45 and we'll get rid of 20 and okay, illegal quantity error. Oh, I can't really read much, can we? Obviously, you can't set the color to anything more than 15. It causes it to overflow. All right, I clearly don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just gonna fix the program like that. And there we go. We got flashing colors on the MSX. Yeah, it's terrible, I know. Control stop, it stops it at a really ugly thing. And if I push stop, that pauses the program. See, it just pauses it. You gotta hit control stop to stop it. The colors are kind of cool though. All right, that's enough of that. All right, well that's gonna be it for my very first MSX video. I found it interesting. I was able to swap the ROM, so this thing is behaving like a Japanese model now, but the side effect is the keyboard layout is terrible. So I'd love some input from the MSX community. I'm sure there are so many people who know so much more than I do. How can I make this thing, well, boot into an English BASIC all the time, but then also have a keyboard layout that, well, works. It's not like really hard to use. And then how can I try some games on this thing? Is there a way that I can get some games loaded onto the ROMs inside the machine? Maybe with some modifications, maybe there's like a bootloader or a boot menu or something we can do. Something cool to use those extra ROM sockets to load some of those 32K games would be really, really nifty. I did a little bit of research last night looking into the cartridge situation, and it seems that there's a multi-cart you can get that supports the different mappers to load the different ROMs. But there's one seller, I think in the Netherlands or somewhere in Europe, and it's pretty expensive for that cartridge. I think it was like 130 euro. Not to mention, it's also out of stock. Now it uses an FPGA and it seems like a pretty complicated cartridge, so I get the cost. But it's a little bit expensive for a machine I really don't know much about. And I have a Mister, an FPGA emulation system, and that can emulate the MSX1, MSX2, and like all those different systems, and it does it perfectly. And if I really want to play those games and stuff, I can do that on that system. That's why I think it would be pretty nifty to get some of the old games working inside of the ROMs in this machine. So I didn't have to have a cartridge, but it'd be fun to bring this out and show people an MSX actually working here in the US. Anyhow, I'd love to hear more about the MSX and your experiences and your thoughts on this system down in the comment section below. I will definitely appreciate all the help I can get with this machine. And yeah, so there we go, my first MSX video. So thanks very much, Stuart, for sending this in and the Facius cartridge. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. Thanks to my patrons. Their names are scrolling up the side of the screen. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Second channel is there as well. Need some subscribes. I'm trying to get that subscriber count up. Definitely on YouTube, the more subscribers you have, the more views you get. Sort of interesting how that works. Anyhow, that is going to be it. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye.